Okay, tonight we're going to basically take you through making a lesson for a patron, doing a lesson from scratch, and using helper resources to generate our ideas and get us organized for this lesson. That's kind of the goal of where we're headed. And so as you get, I know this is probably the thing that consultants are concerned about having to do, especially if you're not a researcher. This has to be the most intimidating activity that you do. So we'll try to give you some ideas and give you some suggestions and hopefully give you things that'll help you avoid some pitfalls that might occur. Okay, so essentially, we're going to use a tool. We're going to use helper resources to organize our thoughts. And then the process that we're going to use is what was developed under what was called at one point find, take, teach, and then later discover, gather, and connect, using that process of how to work with a one-on-one situation with a patron. And we're going to put this into use tonight. And so one of the things you'll learn if you are a consultant for very long and work with very many people is you got to keep track of what you're doing, not just for that one patron, but for all the patrons that you're working with, and that can become a mess. I know I've had scraps of paper floating all over the place and you never can find what you want when you need it. And so we're going to try to show you how the helper resources can help you avoid the problem of where's my notes and help you to stay organized, things like that. Okay, so note taking, record keeping is probably the most important thing you do. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to give a lesson and I didn't take good notes and I know what I want to do kind of, and then all of a sudden nothing wants to go the way I want it to go. And so you've got to learn to really be prepared in writing for the patrons so that you can get back to where you were before when you were researching by yourself to prepare for this lesson. Okay, and there is a better way to do this, and this is found in helper resources. Okay, the helper resources are designed to help us in several different ways. One, there are discovery activities in there we aren't going to go into today, but there are the different discovery activities for the patrons there. There's numerous ways to study their tree, which we will use today, and I'll show you how that could be beneficial to you. There are links there for training. We've talked about that before, but this is one of the places, helper resources, that you can go to for consultant training. And it includes a way to create and store lessons and notes that are linked to your patron so that you'll always be able to go back and find them. And that's one of the big features. It's probably one of the less used features, but I think it's very valuable. Okay, when you're on the home page, and this is the top of the home page, if you click on the little question mark and then go down on the drop down to helper resources, this will take you to the helper resources page where we want to go today. We're going to work on the right-hand side, the planner side of it. The left-hand side has recent articles that'll help you with family search. And then there's also all kinds of links below the different pictures that are over on that side of the page that all lead you to things that will help you be a better consultant. The right-hand side is the working side. This is where you can add somebody to help. And the big advantage here is once they accept that ad, you no longer have to worry about remembering their username or their full name, their last 5 digits of their membership number for the helper number, that kind of thing. From there on, you just click on their name and you're in there as a helper. And so it's a real good way to save you a lot of time and worry about where's that note. Like I've got one right here for one sister, one of our sister missionaries. And today I just added her in the planner so that if I lose this piece of paper, I don't lose my record of how to get to her tree. Okay, so using helper resources. First thing you got to do is add the person in so that you can access their tree in helper resources. And when you do this, you're going to be able to view their tree as if you're that patron. Now, the one thing you've got to remember, though, is you can't be a helper to somebody who's never created an account yet. If they don't have an account, you're not going to be able to be their helper. So make sure they have an account. If they don't, help them create one first, and then you can go in as their helper and help them. So the actual process is you need to find them by clicking add someone, and it's going to take you to a directory. And that directory essentially is your stake directory, and they want you to find that person in the stake directory. That's the preferred way, because then once you find them in there, you just send an invite to them, and that's all you're going to have to do. You could also send them an email. When you click on add somebody, there'll be an option there where you can click send an email. You put their email address in there and send it to them. Or the third option, and that's the one I used with Sister Wonderlick today, is you click on send a link, copy a link. And so I just put her name in there so it knows who it's going to. And then I just copied the link, and then I went and found her email and sent it to her. So there's 2 or 3 ways to do it, but you don't have a way anymore. It used to be in the old days with helper resources that you could go in and set this up by putting in their username and helper number, that sort of thing, or their birth date, their name, their birth date, and helper number. And they don't let you do that anymore for this. You have to do a direct contact to the patron, and then they respond. And if they respond in the affirmative, you can use it. Now, the other option is just to be their helper, just a plain old regular helper. You don't have the tools that we have over here in helper resources, especially the note-taking and lesson-taking tools. Those aren't there. And some of the other things like the discovery activities and stuff like that aren't there either. And then every time you want to do it, you have to physically go find your piece of paper where you've written their helper information down so that you can type it in. And so this is a big way to help things. This really does speed things up. Okay. So once they're on your list to go help them, all you have to do is go click on their name in the list. Okay, so now when you do that, what can we do? We're going to be giving this person a lesson. So I'm skipping all the discovery stuff. I'm coming straight over to their tree. And I think Family Search developed all the different features on the fan chart, especially for those of us that are helping a patron. By using the different versions of the fan chart, I can study the patron's tree and get some ideas of where I want to help the person. Now, this is a tree that's not completely full, but that's okay. It works for full trees, it works for partial trees, and you can also go to other parts of this tree. I could go out and click on somebody out here and say, start the tree with this person, and see a different fan chart than this one. But we'll just go with this and show you the different things that we can do with the 7 different views. And I prefer to set it to 7 generations, so it goes back a little bit further, especially when you're working with younger patrons, because it takes 7 generations just to get back to what we would consider us older folks would be like our grandparents or great grandparents generation. You almost have to do 7 on younger people to get back to that, even just that far. Okay, so one view is the family lines with nothing extra added. A second view is to see birth countries. I think that's very important for you and I because it will help us to know where these people are coming from. And you can kind of tailor what you want to do in the way of helping with the areas in the tree where the relatives come from that you can help the best. I'm mainly a US researcher. And so a big portion of this tree is blue, and the blue is the US people. So I'm probably going to want to pick from somewhere where there are blue colored boxes, because those are where the US people are. We've got a big section over here that appears to be Canada. That would probably be my second favorite place to go. It's a little bit harder for me to do research there as I'm not real comfortable, but I'm more comfortable with that than I am with, let's say, Italy. And there's at least one person on here from Italy, and I definitely would not be wanting to go over there. Okay, so it'll help you to see what parts of the world the people are coming from with that view. Now we have several views, and the biggest reason for these, that as far as for helping us, the biggest way these things help us at this point is showing us the level of activity on the tree for these people. The darker the area, the more of whatever it is we're looking at. These are sources. And so you can see there are certain areas in the tree, this big area up in here, that everybody has 10 or more sources except for the one person. And so this, I can tell, has been heavily researched. This part down here has been heavily researched. This little wedge up here has not been as heavily researched. And this area over here is much less researched. So I'm already starting to get a feel for where I need to be looking. It's going to be one of those 2 wedges more than likely. The next one is stories. There really aren't a lot of stories. When you see somebody that has enough stories to be the real dark color, which means 10 or more, that's somebody that's really a heavily researched person. Even just seeing an area like this where these 2 generations have a lot of stories on almost everybody is indicative of probably an old LDS family. And so this again is another way to give me ideas of where the research has been going on the most. It is interesting that this little wedge in the what I would consider the heavily researched area doesn't have much in the way of stories. Okay, then there's photos, same thing. If you have a lot of photos, there's probably a lot of active relatives. If you don't have photos, you don't have as many active relatives. Research helps. This will show us mainly the biggest thing is it shows in red data problems. So I can see there's a lot of data problems over on the bottom left. And you see a lot of blue in this case, which are record hints. Now, it's interesting. Even though this is heavily researched, there's still a lot of record hints. So, you know, there might be a chance to add some stuff to the tree, but I doubt there'll be much there in the way of new names and things like that that will lead to ordinances. And then, of course, the last one is ordinances itself. And that is very interesting on this tree, because this whole wedge over here has people that need temple work. So if I was doing this particular tree, if I was working with this patron, this would be definitely the area that I would want to go to. Okay, so that's kind of how you can use this. You can look at all the different views and start to get a feel for the tree. And this will give you a guide to where you want to go. And so in this case, the two wedges that I have in red would be ultimately where I would want to go and help the patron. Then I'd have to decide, well, where in there am I going to do this? That'll be the challenge. Okay, once I've done that, I have a couple I want to just show you at the beginning here are two big tools over in the resources area that will help us in keeping track of what we're doing. One is notes. The next thing down below tree and helper resources is notes, where you can go in when now I'm on a certain patron's resources. And so I want to give notes for that patron here. I got to make sure that I'm doing the notes for the person that I'm helping at the time, so I don't put the wrong stuff in there. This was a patron I had that was Hispanic, and we had run into some interesting things to do with her family, and it involved the Social Security death index and records that the family had, and how these don't seem to quite jive, and how we think we found the right person down in Mexico, and they have some different information than what the family had. And it turned out to be true. But that was a place to keep that note so that I don't lose the darn thing. And I can have as many notes as I want. I just go click create new note. It'll tell me when I create it, put what I want in there. Then what I do is I just go and do a copy and paste, or I print out or whatever, so that I have a copy for me, I have a copy for my patron. And in this case, that's what I did for the patrons. I copied it off. The next time we met, I gave it to her, and then she was able to have it. And then she could go contact her aunt and try to figure out what was going on there. Now, the other feature that we'll use tonight is the actual lesson plan. And it, again, is a form that we can fill in however we want to fill in. It's like a mini word processor down in the bottom. Whoops. And when we're done, we can print it out, and it will be kept here on the person's helper resource page. And I can have multiple lesson plans. I can create new ones up here. I can have as many as I want. And what's nice about this is if a year from now I come back and the patron says, hey, let's have another lesson, I'll know what I did before because it's right here. And so you'll see me create that today, because I'll go through and use the lesson plan for the lesson. So preparing a lesson. First thing, let's talk a little bit about this. I was thinking about this today, and I don't think I'm totally crazy here, but this is a little bit like fighting a guerrilla war. Okay, and the guerrillas in this case are the people on the tree that we're trying to find. And they're out there in family search, family tree, hiding and lurking and ready to jump out at us when we find them. And we don't always know if they're there or not. We can't see them until sometimes we're way into the research process. But there really is a lesson here that I'm trying to get to, maybe a little off track, but I think it's an appropriate way to look at it. I have learned over the years that what I see at first isn't always what we're going to have when we get done. I'll say, oh, look, I can add all these people in the tree. And at first I'll say, oh, great, this is going to be a place where I can add a lot of names because they're not in tree. And I've done a little research and I can say, oh yeah, there's a bunch of people that belong here. They show one child and I can see there's 9 more. And then after you've worked on it a little bit, you suddenly discovered that those 9 kids are also in tree, either with the same parents, but not connected to these parents, or they're all floating around tree independent of each other. And you have to go find them and bring them in here. Now, there's a real danger if you do research for a patron, if all you do is hit some sources and say, okay, yeah, I can add this person and that person and this person. If you don't do some background research, do a little background checking on these people, you're going to come prepared to say, oh, we're going to add all these people, we're going to have all this temple work to do. And then when you really get down into it and actually start bringing the family together, you suddenly discover, uh-oh, they're really all there already and the temple work's done. And this is nice, we brought the family together now, but I haven't really helped the patron to do any new temple work. So what do? Well, you can't put the family together for them ahead of time. You shouldn't. I guess you could, but you really shouldn't, because the discovery of this family is the exciting part of the whole process. But what you should do is possibly like take a family group sheet and a blank one and start filling it in with the things you find from different sources. Keep adding new sources, add more information to that family group sheet. And as you go, keep checking for those names using the find feature in tree. Because sometimes, as you know, excuse me, as you add more information to a person, as you add relationships to a person, the duplicates suddenly start appearing if they're there. And so what you want to do is ahead of time realize what kind of what kind of duplicates are out there. And you know, not all duplicates are bad to have, because I mean, if you're trying to find temple work, because many times the duplicates don't have temple work either. You'll see that today. And we can bring people in and it doesn't hurt at all because they still need their work done. It just saves us having to type all their information in. So this is just kind of a caution of what you should do is kind of work it out on paper, since you can't physically put it together here, and then constantly go in to find and do searches for the people that you're finding and you have on that family group sheet, trying to see if you can find a copy of them already floating around a tree. Every time you add a spouse or a child or a marriage or a birth date, a death date, check again. Okay, so we're going to do a partial tree lesson just because this person happened to have a partial tree and I was able to go into the tree and actually work on somebody in the tree rather than do a cousin. The next one of these early lessons we'll do descendancy research and work on cousins. Okay, so this is the tree of my patron. I'm just using the source one to kind of give you a feel for where in the tree I want to go. It's pretty obvious. Most of this tree is pretty well researched. This is an early version of the fan chart that they had, where they only showed, you only had to have 4 sources to get the dark color. Now you have to get up to 10. But it's obvious that this portion here is very well researched. My eyes drawn immediately over to that area there in the lower left. I don't know what it is about the lower left on these examples, but that seems to be where I go. So I realize I'm going to have to do something in there. So I say a little prayer asking for some guidance, and a name jumped out at me. It's the one that's in that box that the red arrow is pointing to. And the name of the gentleman is Jeremiah Ashby. And he has no sources. His name's in there, and there's information about it. You can't see the information, but there is information about him there. So we'll go to his information. So I made notes. Remember, this is what I said, you need to have notes. So I have a little note sheet here for Jeremiah, born supposedly 1855. Those little brackets mean it's a guess. Cutler, Carroll, Indiana. Died in Mexico, Miami, Indiana. I love these places back east where they can't think of any new names, so they use names from other places. Married in 1865, supposedly in Carroll, Indiana, to a Susan Dillman or Degman, who was born 1859, possibly in Cutler, Carroll, Indiana. Don't have a death on her. And they show one child, a Rosa, born in 1881, who died in 1943 in Knox County, Indiana. Now, I looked at, I did some analyzing, so I'm going to stop for a second. I want you just to look at this and think about what you're seeing and any issues that you might see with that. And in a second, I'll show you what I saw and realized as far as some issues about what is shown here. And this is the information that is showing at that time on Family Search. Okay. The first thing was the parents are too young.
Yeah.
If there's a marriage,
and when they got married.
Yeah. If they were married in 1865 and these dates were real, mom would be 6 years old and dad would be 10 years old. So as long as that marriage date came from a marriage record in Indiana. So that's accurate. Those other dates can't be accurate. The second thing I saw, there's got to be more children. If they married in 1865 and Rosa, their only showing child, was born in 1881, I think there's children missing. Now, it might not be any other children, but the odds are there are other children. And since there's not much in the way of sourcing, at least on Jeremiah, there's nothing, there's probably a need for sources. And now the other thing is, since there's no sources, how do we even know that Rosa's the parent or the child of Jeremiah and Susan? So we need to do something about that before we go much further, because Rosa is well established in the patron's tree. I know the tree goes back to Rosa, but how can I prove that it goes beyond Rosa to Jeremiah and Susan? That's what I really need to verify first. You would think you'd want to work on Jeremiah and Susan first, but really the relationship to Jeremiah and Susan is more important to establish than learning more about those two people. Now, Rosa's got a problem, as we're going to see. According to this, she's born after 1880, so she's not going to be on the 1880 census. And we're going to try to use the simple sources for this experiment here. And so 1880 is not going to help us. There's no 1890 census of such. There's a few little pages, but not much. The odds of this family being on it are next to 0. And we're going to find out that she marries before 1900, so she's not going to be at home on the 1900 census. And so we've got some problems here. The censuses aren't going to help us. Well, let's see what we can find out about Rosa to begin with. Okay, so this is her information. And I started doing a little search on her, just using the simple stuff, censuses. So I do find her in 1900. She says she's 22. That means she's born July of 1878, because that's what it says right there on the census. July 1878 for her birth. Now, whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. It says she's been married 4 years. So that means she married about 1896. She's the mother of 3 children and 2 of them are still living. And she said she was born in Indiana. Her father was born in Indiana and her mother was born in Virginia. Okay, so now what happens 10 years later? In 1910, she's only aged 6 years. Typical female situation. They like to show a little younger than they really are. That now puts her birth at 1882. So one census says she would be on the 1880 census because she was already born. This one says, nope, she won't be there. This time she's born in Indiana and her mom and dad are born in Indiana. Her mother's not born in Virginia on this census. 10 years later, she's now aged 12 years. That puts her birth back to about 1880, I mean. So she may or may not be on that 1880 census. She's born in Indiana. Her father's in Indiana. And it's obvious that they're not sure about mom because it just says Mother USA. And that may be why one time it's Virginia, one time it's Indiana. Maybe Rosa never really knew. 1930, Rosa went and aged 10 years. She's born in Indiana, father Indiana, mother Indiana. And she said she was married at age 18. That particular census asks you your age at first marriage. And she put 18. That calculates out 1896 minus 18 to a birth around 1878, which means she would be on the census. The reason I keep talking about this 1880 census is nobody's had ever found this family, the family of Jeremiah and Susan, on the 1880 census. And so it is something we'd like to find, and I'd like to know if we can expect to find Rosa there. And from this, it's a maybe, maybe not situation. 1940, she's now 61, born in Indiana, and that would put her at about 1879. Okay, so then the question comes, where is she? Was she born before or after 1880? And that will be a big implication in helping us know who her parents are. And where in the heck did these dates come from? That July 4th, 1881 and 25 November, 1943. Well, it's real simple. It's called the headstone. And we know the headstones are always accurate, right? No, you can't always guarantee a headstone's correct. So you need to verify it still. This is secondary information. The death is probably pretty accurate, though even it could be wrong. But the birth is, you know, Rosa was the only one that was there probably that was living close to the time of her death, and she's not there to report it anymore. So it's definitely hearsay and secondary sources. Okay. Ancestry has her death certificates. Real sad, she died of cancer of the rectum. That's not a way to go. Anyway, it shows the birth dates that you see on the stone and the death date. You see the 4th of July, 1881, and the death date was the 25th of November, 1943. Now, for parents, it says Jerry Ashby, born in Indiana, and Mary, born in Indiana. Now, everything we had heard prior to this was that Susan was her mother. So that's kind of interesting. Who is this Mary? And Mary's obviously not the name Susan. Is it Mary Susan? Or is it Mary something totally different? The source is right below that red box, and it's somebody else from Lawrenceville, Indiana. And oh, I know what it is. This is her husband. Now, the husband is giving the wife's information. So we hope that the husband has good records. But this isn't his family, so you know, who knows what he knew, who he had ever met, what kind of records might have been around the home. Okay, so now let's try to see if we can find this family with or without Rosa. Remembering that Jeremiah and Ashby Susan Dillman married supposedly the 5th of April, 1865. I went looking, and in 1880 in Monroe, Carroll, Indiana, I found the family. Notice the last name, Ashby. Now that's interesting. And part of it is because that agrees with the marriage record. The actual marriage record, when we found it, for the 5th of April, 1865, which is correct, said Ashby for Jeremiah. You're going to find that Jeremiah's name tends to change a little bit. Now, This is an interesting family. Rosa is there. There is a Rosa, who's one, which would be about 1879 or late in 1878, which would fit some of the census records we've had on her. Notice there's a big gap here of 7 years between her and the next child above. There's a 6-year gap between Mary and Phoebe, a 4-year gap between Julia and Phoebe, and this Julia is born in 1862, which is a full 3 years before Jeremiah and Susan got married. There probably was an earlier marriage. That's just as idea at this point, a supposition. One of the things to support it is the fact that there's on this census, a 14-year, or 14-year difference between the ages of Jeremiah and Susan. And very often, a second marriage, the woman is much younger than the husband. Not always, but very often. And so that would make sense. And it's possible that, Julia came from a prior marriage. And then starting with Phoebe, we have Susan's children. Now, where the death certificate for Rosa came up with this other mother's name, I don't know, unless Susan died and Jeremiah married again, and the husband of Rosa had met this other woman, Mary, and just assumed that that was Rosa's mother, natural mother. Who knows? But we're finally getting a feel for the family. Jeremiah would be born about 1826. Susan would be born about 1840. And so things fit pretty good. Since it shows that Rosa was born before 1880, this puts her in this family. And it's so grateful, because having this and knowing that we needed a Jeremiah and Susan, everything fits together beautifully and verifies the connection of Rosa to Jeremiah and Susan. Okay, and this is a census where they do mention relationships, and it says daughter. Now, what if we go earlier? We're not going to find Rosa, but we should be able to find Phoebe and Julia if we go 10 years back. So we'll try to see what happens there. And in 1870, in the same county, we have them under Ashby this time, Jeremiah and Susan, with different ages. And Jeremiah is aged a huge amount. He's now supposedly born in 1812, which makes him like 33 years younger or older than Susan, which I find hard to believe. Here's Julia and Phoebe and a Jacob, who's one. Now, Jacob does not show up in the next census. So besides the fact that we have Ashby here, and the parents' names are very different, we can add a Jacob who probably dies before 1880. We may have some work to do to try to figure out, because at the most he would have been maybe 10 or 9 years old. And it's going to be hard to find death records at that time period. Now, the other thing is, because of the differences in ages here, until we can find some kind of death record for Jeremiah or Susan, I don't trust this particular set of death records. And I went back to the 1881, which is kind of unusual that you go to a later time period to get a date. But I think that's a little more accurate, that he's born maybe around 1826. And she was born about 1840 or so, between 40 and 45. So anyway, this is nice. We're starting to now see the family. Pieces are starting to come together. I'm writing this family down on a family group sheet. And so now it's time to go help Sister Dixon have a lesson here. And of course, in the meantime, I've gone and I've been looking for duplicates and things like that. And I'll put those into the lesson. I'm not going to bore you with how I research those out right now, but we'll see it. So I go over and I say, okay, let's create a lesson. And I have a date set up. It's called Ashby Family. Our goal is to add family members to the family of Jeremiah Ashby and submit these names for temple work. So here's the lesson plan. The first thing I do is I tell her how to go find these people. I've got to be able to let her know how to go find Jeremiah Ashby. So I say, you go to your father, Richard Charles Dixon, then go up his tree to Lula Mae Pelham, and then to her mother, Rosa Anna Ashby, and I give the ID number. Then I say, okay, here are the things we're going to do. We're going to add the marriage hint for Jeremiah. Okay, because that's where we were going to, was Jeremiah, the father of Rosa. We're going to put the hint in, and you're going to note that the name is spelled Ash, but that's okay. You're going to find the family using Ashby, Ashby with an E, and Ashba. There was also the 1880 hint for the family now. And this is our family. So note that Rosa's listed on this as a 1-year-old, even though the tree shows her being born in 1881. Whoops. So that 1881 date's an error. So I don't put it here, but we're going to have to go change the date. And for now, don't add the child Julia from the census. And I'll explain why in a second. Plus, in fact, she's also probably a child of another wife and was born before Susan married Jeremiah. We don't know yet who that woman is. Edits, change Jeremiah's age to about 1826. And this is a mistake. This should say in Indiana. Susan changed to 1840, Indiana. Okay, now manually add a child to an unnamed wife of Jeremiah. This is, we're talking about this Julia. She's already in tree. See, I went researched and I know she's already there. So all you're going to do is add a child to a family of Jeremiah with no wife known, and would add her with this ID number instead of typing it in. She shows with a husband and 2 kids, but no parents. And this is great. Put her in there because they all need temple work. Temple work was not done for them, but somebody already put them in tree for us. So this is great. Just bring them over into tree. And then look for duplicates. If you don't find one while adding child Phoebe, which was one of the kids in the census, there really is one. And so this was a child that was listed with parents Jeremiah and Susan. And so these will need merging. So basically after you add in Phoebe, it'll show up as a possible duplicate, and you'll add it in there. So when we got done, and a little later, this is what the family looked like. I didn't get a chance to take a picture of it. I didn't think to take a picture of it when I first made this family. And it was kind of funny because along came another patron behind me. They changed all the names except for Rosa to Ashba because of the 1880 census and the marriage record. And they apparently didn't like the fact that Julianne was in a marriage with no mother and didn't pay attention to when they got married back here in 1865. And so they moved her out of that marriage with just Jeremiah and the unknown mother and put her in with the other kids. Yeah, it doesn't matter. She's there. And I followed this family along, and Sister Dixon's gone and submitted all the names and done quite a bit of the work. Still got a little bit to go. But this basically is what you do when you prepare a lesson. Try to keep it simple, keep your own notes, and verify what's going to happen. Do some checking, do a lot of finds with the different information you have, and try to uncover those gorillas that are out there hiding in the bushes so that they don't come out and surprise you when you actually sit down with the patron, even though sometimes, no matter how hard you work it, they don't really show until after you really physically put the family together. Now, I would suggest that you practice this with your own tree. If you're not a researcher, you haven't done this very often, do it with your own tree. Pick a person out in your tree, and instead of putting everybody in right away, practice doing it on a blank family group sheet. And then you can find those if you just go over into the research wiki and search for family group sheet. You're going to find a page where it has different blanks that you can print out and just use as a form. But if you do that, you'll get comfortable. It'll be easier to do. So in a couple of months down the road, we'll be doing the next lesson of this series where we do basically the same thing, create a lesson, but this time we'll be using the descendancy report to help us find cousins that we can submit. So, questions? Do we have any questions?